They say the first time you see the truth, really see it, something in you quietly dies. For me, that moment came over a bottle of Chardonnay and a plate of shrimp and grits at Emma's parents' house in Charleston. It was supposed to be just another Friday family dinner. The kind we flew down for every couple of months. Emma called them check-ins. Like she was clocking into her birthright. Her mother insisted on these formal get-togethers to maintain the illusion that everything in their world was polished, elegant, and in perfect working order. Charleston was Emma's childhood kingdom. Her family's palatial home stood like a monument to money that had never known struggle. Every room was trimmed with tradition, with wallpaper older than my student loans and more portraits of ancestors than people currently living in the house. The kind of place where you couldn't sneeze without someone offering you a monogrammed handkerchief and a passive-aggressive blessing. That evening, I was seated at the far end of a 10-seat dining table, next to her Uncle Douglas, who had cornered me into a one-sided conversation about tax loopholes in antique sailboats. I nodded along, pretending to care, but my mind was already elsewhere. Emma sat across from me, halfway down the table, laughing a little too loud at her cousin's story about skiing in the Alps. She looked stunning, as always, dark green dress that matched her eyes, a gold bracelet I'd bought her last Christmas, and that confidence she wore like perfume. But there was something off. She'd been distant since the flight, cold, but performative. She'd made a show of holding my hand when we stepped off the plane, even though her fingers barely curled around mine. Her laugh had a practiced rhythm, and when she looked at me it was like I wasn't entirely there, like I was a placeholder, not a person. Still, I kept the peace. That was my role, quiet, agreeable, the +1 with a marriage license. It wasn't until dessert that it happened. The table had quieted as Emma's mother launched into a story about some charity gala. I'd zoned out, watching the flickering candlelight play against the polished silverware. That's when Emma's phone, which had been sitting face up on the tablecloth beside her wine glass, lit up with a soft buzz. Just a glance. That's all it took. A preview popped up from a group chat, no name, just a string of emojis and a photo thumbnail. My eyes flicked down before I could stop myself. The image was grainy but clear enough. Cozy hotel bar. 2 glasses of red wine side by side on the counter. And behind them, a blurry but unmistakable detail. A man's hand resting on the waist of a woman in a green scarf. Emma's green scarf. The silk one I got her in Milan 2 years ago. She caught me looking. Her hand moved with practiced smoothness. Just a flick of her wrist to turn the phone over, screen down. She didn't flinch, didn't stutter, didn't give even a whisper of guilt. Instead, she smiled. And then, God help me, she laughed. Oh, she said loudly, clearly for the whole table to hear. Mark was telling me the funniest thing the other day. He thinks he's getting promoted this quarter. Isn't that cute? There was a pause, then polite laughter. Her dad shook his head, letting out that familiar disappointed chuckle. Ah, corporate hopefulness. Dangerous stuff. Emma took a sip of her wine. He works so hard. Bless him. But sometimes I think the office just doesn't take him seriously. He's just too nice. The chuckles grew bolder now. I felt a heat rise to my ears, but I said nothing. Her cousin chimed in. Well, not everyone can be cutthroat. Some people are just meant to be steady. Reliable, Emma added, with a smirk that only I could decode. The conversation moved on. Just like that, I was a joke. Light dinner entertainment for the people who thought manners could cover cruelty. I tried to breathe normally, chew politely, sip my drink with poise. But I was unraveling. Not from the insult, God knows I've learned to let those slide, but from what I'd just seen. That photo, that hand, that scarf. It wasn't a coincidence. I knew that instantly. That scarf hadn't been worn in months. And Emma didn't drink red wine anymore. Not since she'd gone low histamine after that cleanse in April. But there it was, on her waist in a hotel bar with a man I didn't recognize. And the way she turned the moment into a stage to humiliate me, that wasn't reflex. That was strategy. She wanted me distracted, embarrassed, small. And in the sickest way, it worked. Everyone laughed and moved on. And I sat there smiling like a fool with a secret burning a hole through my chest. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't ask her who sent the message or why she'd lied about the scarf being lost in a lift last spring. I didn't question why her phone had suddenly become glued to her hand these past few months, or why she'd started sleeping with it under her pillow. I just played my part, quiet Mark, dependable Mark, the man who didn't make waves. I cleared my plate. I thanked her mother for dinner. I nodded at her father's unsolicited advice about asserting myself more if I wanted to grow. But inside, something cracked. I'd ignored the earlier signs, the late nights, the sudden interest in solo yoga classes, the carefully curated distance. I told myself it was a phase, a rough patch, something every couple goes through. But that night, that was different. That wasn't distance. That was deception. And when I looked at Emma across the room, laughing, charming, sipping her wine like nothing in the world could touch her, I realized she wasn't just hiding something. She was daring me to find it. After Charleston, I stopped lying to myself. It wasn't even about the photo anymore. That image had just lit the match. What came next, what I saw when I finally let myself look, was a slow, merciless fire crawling through every corner of my mind. I began to see everything for what it really was. The night after we flew home, Emma said she was going to bed early. I stayed up in the living room, lights off, just sitting in the dark, trying to quiet the storm in my chest. She walked by me without a word. No goodnight, no glance, just the quiet sound of her slippers disappearing down the hallway. Like I was invisible. That was becoming a pattern. She used to linger, used to wait for me to finish brushing my teeth, slide under the blanket and ask me about my day. She used to lay her head on my chest. That was gone. These days, she fell asleep facing the wall. If she was even asleep at all. A week later, she started locking her phone. Not just with a password, but with facial recognition, only hers. I asked why, and she laughed, tossing me a look like I just asked if the moon was made of cheese. Because it's 2025, Mark. You'd lose your head if it wasn't screwed on. I'm just being cautious. Cautious, right? Funny thing is, I never snooped. Never had a reason to. I trusted her. Blindly. And she knew that. Then came the disabled location services. The excuse? It drains battery. She told me that with the same dismissive tone you'd use on a child asking why the sky's blue. And maybe I'd have bought it months ago. But this time I paid attention. She'd also picked up a new hobby. Yoga, apparently. But not at the gym she used to go to, the one 5 minutes from our house. No. Now it was a boutique studio downtown, near the financial district, with early evening classes that sometimes ran 2 hours long. I looked it up. The studio didn't even offer classes past 7 p.m. But Emma regularly got home around 8:30. I asked her about it once. Just lightly, like I wasn't suspicious. Oh, she said. Sometimes I stay after to talk with some of the women. We're organizing a retreat. She always had an answer, but they were just convincing enough to keep me from calling her out directly. Just vague enough to give her room to breathe, and me room to doubt myself. I started tracking the little things. Tiny, stupid details. Her gym bag was always packed too neatly, like it hadn't been used. Her water bottle stayed dry. Her shoes didn't carry that damp yoga smell. Once, I even checked the passenger seat in her car. Nothing. No mat, no towel, no gym receipt, no signs of anything. That's when I stopped asking. I just started observing. She wore more perfume now. And not the soft floral kind she used to wear, the one I bought her on our 5th anniversary. No, this was different. Sharper. Muskier. Less freshly picked. And more don't ask where I've been. She didn't wear it for me. That much was obvious. There were nights she came home looking changed. Her hair tousled in ways no yoga class could explain. Her skin flushed. Her lips slightly smudged. Once, she came in laughing at something on her phone, only to go dead silent when she saw me on the couch. Like she'd forgotten I was there. She didn't kiss me hello anymore. Didn't ask how my day went. She'd just walk straight to the fridge, pour herself a glass of wine, and vanish upstairs. Some days, I could hear her talking in the shower. Whispering, maybe, not loud enough to make out words, but just enough to know it wasn't a podcast. One Saturday morning, she left her scarf on the coat rack by mistake. The same one from the photo. I picked it up out of instinct. That's when I caught the scent. Cologne. Not hers. Definitely not mine. It smelled expensive. Heavy. Spiced wood and leather. The kind worn by someone who knows how to command a room and enjoys being watched. It stuck with me all day. Her banking behavior changed, too. She'd always been the financially impulsive one, but now she was downright evasive. I noticed random withdrawals, small ones, always under $100, never at the same location. When I asked her what they were for, she waved me off. "You're not seriously policing my spending now, are you?" That word, policing, it hit me harder than I expected. As if I were some overbearing figure she had to escape. As if my questions were interrogation, not concern. And it didn't stop there. She started describing me differently around friends. I caught it in little snippets. Jokes about how I never leave the house, or how I was more interested in spreadsheets than spontaneity. Once, at a dinner party, she told a story about how I forgot to RSVP to some event for her company. "He's great," she said, laughing to the group. "Just not great under pressure." They all chuckled. I just nodded, smiled like it didn't bother me. But it did. Because the version of me she was painting wasn't real. It was her defense. A story she was building to justify something she hadn't admitted yet. To them, I was the tired guy, the steady one, the one who probably didn't deserve someone like her. They pitted her, and I think she liked that. One night, I stayed up after she went to bed. I sat in the office with the lights off, just staring out the window, trying to make sense of who she had become. The irony is I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't even devastated. I was disoriented, like waking up in a familiar room to find all the furniture had been moved. This wasn't the woman I married. That woman used to tell me everything. Used to laugh until her mascara ran. Used to fight for us. Now, she barely acknowledged my existence unless she needed someone to blame. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I didn't need a smoking G***N. What I had was worse, death by 1,000 cuts. Little betrayals. Tiny shifts. Glances that lingered too long on strangers. Compliments she saved for other people. Disdain she reserved just for me. She was slipping away inch by inch. But I had no intention of chasing her blindly. Because something else was shifting, too. Inside me. I wasn't the same Mark she thought she could outmaneuver. I wasn't clueless. I wasn't weak. I was watching. And more importantly, I was remembering everything. There's a difference between suspicion and certainty. Suspicion is a shadow in the corner of your eye. It flickers, hides when you turn to look, dares you to chase it. Certainty is the punch to the gut when the lights come on and there's nowhere left to hide. My certainty came on a Tuesday morning. A dull, gray kind of morning, the kind that makes coffee taste bitter and time feel heavier. Emma had already left for work. Early, too early. Claiming there was a client onboarding breakfast she needed to attend. I didn't ask questions anymore. I just said, "Drive safe," and watched her go. After she left, I walked into the kitchen and sat at the table, not even pretending to scroll my phone or eat. I just stared out the window, letting the silence settle. Then I remembered I'd received a bank alert the night before. Just a fraud detection notification, nothing serious. At least that's what I assumed. I opened the banking app, ready to dismiss it. That's when I saw the charge. The Ark Heron Hotel, $412.98. It hit me like a slap. The Ark Heron wasn't just any hotel. It was a boutique luxury spot in Austin, about 3 hours away. We had stayed there once, years ago, for an anniversary. Emma had loved the rooftop bar, the scent of citrus candles in the hallway, the sheets, which she claimed were softer than ours because they were washed with attention. I remembered that trip vividly. We laughed a lot that weekend. At least I thought we had. This charge was from 3 days ago. I sat back in the chair, staring at the number like it would rearrange itself into something more innocent. Didn't. It just sat there, stone cold and unbothered, daring me to ask the question I already knew the answer to. I clicked to expand the charge. There were 2 transactions rolled into one. A dinner at the in-house restaurant and a spa charge. Couples aromatherapy massage. 80 minutes. Couples. That word landed harder than I expected. Not just because it confirmed what I feared, but because it was such an intentional choice. It wasn't just a room. Not just a drink at a bar. It was time. Shared time. A decision to do something together. The same day she told me she was staying late for a work strategy call. The same night she came home exhausted and fell asleep in the guest room after claiming she had a migraine. I didn't slam anything. I didn't shout. I just got up, walked to the fridge, and poured myself a glass of orange juice. That's when I remembered the shared cloud folder we had set up years ago so we could easily swap vacation photos and documents. I opened it, and there it was. Not even hidden. Not even in a subfolder. Just sitting there like it belonged. A live photo, one of those brief motion snaps the phone takes when you press the shutter. I clicked it. My stomach clenched. Emma. Her hair pulled back, soft makeup, wearing the same green scarf. Leaning in toward a man I didn't recognize. His face was mostly obscured by the angle, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the moment the photo played. The image moved, 2 seconds of motion. Just enough. He kissed her. Right there, in the hotel room, with the Archeron signature lighting visible in the background. She laughed at the end of it. Not forced. Not awkward. Real. That sound used to be mine. I closed the folder. My hands were trembling, but my mind was sharp. Sharper than it had been in weeks. The fog of doubt was gone. No more shadows. No more guessing. This was truth. And it was ugly. I walked upstairs to our bedroom and opened the drawer where she kept her scarves. It was empty. Of course it was. I knew where that scarf had been. I had seen it in motion. I had smelled the cologne clinging to it when she tossed it carelessly on the coat rack days before. What used to be circumstantial was now tangible. Timelines, receipts, images, all of it lined up too perfectly to ignore. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the weight of it press down on me. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the ease of it, the comfort, the sheer casual nature of her deception. There wasn't guilt in that photo. There wasn't hesitation in her movements. If anything, there was familiarity, like it wasn't the first time. That's when I stopped calling it an affair in my head. This wasn't some reckless mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a second life. One she'd built quietly, methodically, behind a curtain she knew I wouldn't pull back. But I had pulled it, and now I couldn't unsee what was on the other side. I stared out the window for a long time, trying to understand how it got here. Trying to rewind the tape far enough to catch the moment where things truly changed. But the truth is, I'd never see it coming. Because I wasn't looking for a reason not to trust her. I was looking for ways to keep trusting her. There's a difference. And she'd counted on that. I thought about confronting her. About texting her right then and there. But I knew how that would go. She'd deny, then deflect. Cry maybe. Tell me it was complicated. That she didn't mean for it to happen. That she felt disconnected. And needed to feel something again. I'd heard enough stories like this from friends to know the playbook. But I didn't want explanations. I wanted leverage. So I started documenting everything. I took **TS of the bank charges, copied the live photo and backed it up to an encrypted folder. I went through our financial records and flagged every charge that didn't line up with her alibis. I even wrote out a timeline where she said she was versus where she actually had been. Her lies weren't even clever, just lazy. She thought I wouldn't look, thought I wouldn't dare. But I did. Later that night, she came home with a smoothie in her hand and a fake cheer in her voice. She kissed my cheek like nothing had happened and said, "Sorry I've been so tired lately. Work's just draining." I looked at her for a long time. She didn't meet my eyes. She just walked past me into the kitchen, humming a tune she probably didn't even hear. That was when I realized I was no longer in a marriage. I was in a cover story, and she was the lead actor. But I wasn't going to be the fool in the background anymore. I wasn't going to confront her that night, or the next. I wasn't going to scream or beg or crumble. No, I was going to be quiet. strategic, patient, because now I had the one thing I'd been missing all along. Proof. And with it, the freedom to stop reacting and start planning. People assume the betrayed either explode or collapse. But there's a third response, less dramatic, harder to detect. Strategy. That's where I went after finding the photo. After the bank charges. After watching the person I once swore to protect become the person I had to shield myself from. I didn't confront her. I didn't cry. I went quiet. And I started building. Emma never saw me as a threat. That was her mistake. She thought I was soft. Simple. An easy mark, no pun intended. What she didn't know was that while she was out playing with fire, I'd been quietly studying how to hold the extinguisher. See, months before any of this started, before I knew what I was really preparing for, I'd already *N working on a side project. At the time, it wasn't revenge. It wasn't even personal. It was just business. But then things changed. Started when I met Victor Hale. Victor was the kind of guy you didn't forget after 5 minutes. Sharp as a razor, always in a suit that made you wonder what he knew and how he knew it. We met through a consulting pitch I gave for his firm. Nothing special at first, just a brief conversation after a corporate webinar. But he asked smart questions. The kind that didn't just test your knowledge, they tested your instincts. Over the next few months, I ended up consulting for his group on the side. Late nights, NDA-covered calls, spreadsheets that danced with the kind of numbers no one wanted made public. Hale specialized in corporate turnarounds, or, in less polite terms, takeovers. He had a gift for identifying weak spots in family-run businesses, unsecured loans, handshake agreements, vanity hires, compliance gaps. He knew how to turn whispers into *P***ns. And he respected one thing above all else: discipline. One night, around the time Emma was at yoga, Victor and I were on a call reviewing the structure of a logistics company that had been passed down through 3 generations. He asked me a simple question. "What do you know about Hargrave and Langston?" I froze. Emma's maiden name was Hargrave. Langston was her mother's side. The company was their crown jewel, a shipping logistics empire that spanned the Southeast. Founded by Emma's grandfather, passed to her uncle, and now co-managed by her mother, Eleanor Hargrave, who wore pearls like armor and saw herself as a queen behind the curtain. "Just what's publicly known," I said cautiously. Victor paused. "Well, we've been sniffing around them for 6 months. You interested in digging deeper?" I didn't answer right away. I thought of Emma, of her family's smugness, of that dinner in Charleston, of the photo, the cologne, the fake yoga classes, all of it. "Yes," I said. "I'm interested." That was the beginning. From that point on, I worked quietly with Victor's team. On paper, I was just another contracted analyst. In practice, I was the one with the key. I had proximity. I had names, patterns, stories overheard at brunches. Tax rumors slipped into wine-fueled rants at family holidays. I never touched anything I wasn't allowed to touch. But I listened. And I remembered. Emma thought I was fading. In her eyes, I'd become smaller, weaker. She had no idea I was working 15-hour days. Not because I was desperate to impress a boss, but because I was helping build the scaffolding around her family's empire. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, surgical. First came the loans. Turns out, Hargrave and Langston had extended millions in internal loans to affiliated shell companies with no formal agreements. Her uncle, the CFO, had been using company funds to float a vineyard project in Virginia under his wife's name. That wasn't just messy, it was leverage. Then came the compliance gaps. I found 2 years' worth of hazy vendor contracts, deliberately vague language that violated federal transport guidelines. Nothing criminal yet, but certainly exploitable. By the time we hit month 4, Victor's firm had quietly *and acquiring debt positions tied to the company's real estate holdings. Warehouses, depots, even a small port lease down in Savannah. All legal, all quiet. Emma never noticed the shift in me. She thought I was distracted by work. She made little jabs about it. Rolled her eyes when I worked late. Said things like, "God, don't you ever take a break?" With just enough contempt to sting. But she didn't understand. She thought I was burying myself to avoid seeing the truth. I wasn't avoiding it. I was preparing for it. There was one moment I'll never forget. A Wednesday evening. She came home late, hair slightly windblown, keys jingling a little too casually. She dropped her bag on the counter and said, "You're still working? Seriously, Mark, don't be that guy. You're not impressing anyone." I looked at her. Really looked. She didn't see it, but I'd already seen the credit card charge from her dinner in Austin. Already backed up the photo. Already locked it behind 3 layers of encryption. Already printed hard copies in an envelope marked escrow instructions. Private. She thought she had the upper hand, but I had already taken the board. Later that night, I pretended to sleep next to her while her phone buzzed twice. She didn't check it. She just smiled slightly in the dark and turned away from me. And I smiled too because the next day Victor called with an update. "We've secured the 3rd lien. With that, we had critical leverage over one of their warehousing arms. And once the restructuring talks began, we could push board members into consolidating control under new management." Emma's family believed in legacy, in names and pride and paper-thin power held together by tradition. I believed in silence, in records, in timing. I wasn't going to destroy them in a fit of rage. I was going to suffocate them with their own paperwork. And as for Emma, she wouldn't see it coming, because she never once believed I had it in me. There's a kind of power in being underestimated. It lets you move through rooms like fog, silent, unnoticed, everywhere. That's what I became after I gathered the proof. After the arc heron. After the photo. After Emma came home with lipstick barely wiped away and called me distant for not laughing at her half-hearted jokes. She thought I was folding. What I was really doing was closing in. They didn't see it. Not Emma. Not her family. To them, I was still the harmless husband. Awkward at parties, forgettable in conversation, dressed a little too plainly for the country club crowd. That was fine. I let them laugh. I let them talk. I nodded when they made sideways comments and poured drinks with a smile while they whispered like I was too dull to hear them. But while they toasted generational wealth and waxed poetic about market cycles, I was already inside their foundation, measuring the cracks they didn't even know existed. Emma's mother, Eleanor, ran Hargrave and Langston with the kind of ruthless elegance that scared lesser executives into silence. But she was lazy when it came to documentation. She signed off on things she didn't read, trusted advisors too blindly, relied on relationships forged over decades rather than current compliance. And that made her vulnerable. Victor and I had set the trap slowly. Piece by piece, we mapped out every weak point. We knew which of their subsidiaries were over-leveraged. We knew which third-party vendors had inconsistent contracts. We found an environmental compliance audit from 3 years ago that had never been followed up on. Quiet, forgettable liabilities until someone decides to call them in. I became a ghost in their system. At family gatherings, I stayed quiet. I smiled through roasted duck and Chardonnay and performed like a man trying to keep up with a world slightly out of reach. Meanwhile, Victor's legal team drafted new terms, buried in acquisitions that looked innocuous on the surface. Emma thought she had won. She had her double life. She had the upper hand socially. Her family had turned her version of me into gospel. "Mark's harmless," they'd say. "Nice guy, but not a mover." I heard it all. Through walls, through smiles, through the gritted teeth of faux compliments. And I let them believe it, because silence is the best camouflage. Emma and I barely spoke at home by that point. She'd come in late, ask about the dog we didn't have, pretend she'd forgotten we canceled cable. She didn't notice I was going to bed later, or that I'd cleared out the safe in the closet. She didn't notice the second phone I kept in my desk drawer or the burner email used for forwarding legal documents. She was too busy living the lie she thought she was getting away with. But she had no idea I was stacking bricks behind her. The company's logistics hub in Atlanta was already under our control. Legally, through debt positions and leasing contracts, Victor's proxy firm had taken over the shell company that technically owned the land. We hadn't declared it. Not yet. That would come later. After the restructure. After the shift. My silence bought me access. My absence bought me time. At dinners, when they mocked me for not keeping up with current events, I nodded. When Eleanor asked if I was still doing that little spreadsheet thing, I smiled. When Emma called me comfortable in front of her cousins, I raised my glass. Comfortable, predictable, harmless, all perfect labels for a man they weren't watching. The irony was, the more they dismissed me, the more they gave me. Emma stopped noticing what I did with my time. She didn't question my weekend work retreats. She barely read the calendar invites. When I said I'd be in Charlotte with Victor for a compliance workshop, she just grunted from behind her tablet. That's how I sat across from her mother's COO without raising suspicion. That's how I got the breakdown of H&L's freight division and found out they hadn't updated their insurance rates in 2 years, despite expanding to 3 new regional hubs. That alone would have been enough leverage in the right court. But I wasn't going to court. I was going for control. Emma's contempt insulated me. Her pride kept her blind. She didn't see that my detachment wasn't apathy, it was discipline. Every time she mocked my routines or rolled her eyes when I stayed up late, she bought me more space to maneuver. She spent her time pretending I didn't matter. I spent mine preparing to make her answer for it. One night, she came home late again. Hair in a messy updo, makeup slightly off, wearing heels I didn't recognize. She walked in and said, "You're still working?" Her tone was laced with boredom. "Always," I said, not looking up. She stood there for a moment, like she wanted me to say more. Maybe start a fight. Maybe beg. But I didn't give her anything. I just kept reading a document labeled, Asset Transfer Options, Phase 2. She turned away, walked upstairs without another word. That was when I knew I had her exactly where I wanted her, comfortable in the lie, unaware of the stage being built beneath her feet. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was transformation. She made me invisible. But she forgot what invisible men can do when they stop trying to be seen.